Veterans, in today's video, I'm going to give you an example of when some VA employees are developing to deny when you submit your sufficient and actionable DBQ and Nexus statement. Make sure you stick around. Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Dwayne Kimball, owner, founder of KMD89, a VA Claims Consulting, United States Army veteran, and retired VA rating specialist. Today's video, developing to deny when you, the veteran, submit your DBQ and Nexus statement, which is sufficient and actionable for rating purposes. But before we get into today's video, as always, make sure you go out and purchase my new book, VA Claims Success. It is definitely a game changer, and thank you for everyone that is showing love and support. Now, today's video, I've been seeing a lot of veterans rating decisions when they have submitted an actionable and sufficient or sufficient and actionable DBQ and Nexus statement. And what some VA employees are doing is what is known as developing to deny, when they have evidence that they can use to rate the case. Now, I've done videos in the past where I was warning veterans, hey, this is a trend that I've been seeing. This is what's going on. And I don't think a lot of people paid attention. So I'm going to share with you an example that you can see in a decision that you receive to know if you fall in this category. Now, one, we as veterans have to be educated and make sure that our DBQ and Nexus statement is sufficient. If it's not, then that could pose a problem. But if you know and you had somebody to review that DBQ and Nexus statement and you know that it's sufficient, then you know what you need to do if the VA schedules you a CMP exam, which is what? Developing to deny. Now, you know I'm a U.S. Army veteran, and Army veterans love slides, so I got 3 slides for you. Let's go ahead and get into it. Slide number 1. Here in slide number 1, this is an excerpt from a decision, okay? And if you submit an actionable and sufficient DBQ and Nexus and you refuse the VA CMP exam, more than likely, this is what you will receive. Or if you decide to go to the third-party CMP exam, okay? This is what it possibly could look like. Paragraph number 1, we acknowledge receipt of your private medical opinion intending to link your current disability to a disease, event, or injury from your military service. Look at that colorful word, intending, not that it actually did, right? Then I highlighted something for you here in red. The medical opinion we received from the VA contractor was more persuasive than your private physician. Okay, now, 9 times out of 10, what I've been seeing, veterans submit a sufficient and actionable DBQ and Nexus statement. The VA employee ignores it, says, nope, I want you to go see our examiner. The veteran goes to that exam, and guess what? That examiner gave a negative opinion. And so they use what I highlighted in red against your positive opinion. I'm gonna say that again. They use that statement to justify using their negative opinion, their negative opinion over your positive opinion, okay? So they had evidence that they could have used, they just opted not to and said, oh, you know what? I'm gonna request an exam to see if a veteran will go, because I know our doctor more than likely is going to say no, and then I'm going to use that colorful statement that I highlighted in red against the veteran, all right? So something definitely to keep in mind. But again, we the veteran, we have to make sure our DBQs and Nexus statements are completed per VA guidelines. Moving right along, slide number 2. Here in slide number 2, this is an M21 reference, okay? And again, I don't always copy the entire reference, but you have the number and the name of the M21 reference, so you can go out there and do additional research, okay? So it states, review of DBQs to ensure, one, the healthcare provider meets any specialty requirements for the examination conducted. So we all know that there's two types of mental DBQs. You have the PTSD, a review DBQ, and then you have the mental diagnosis other than PTSD DBQ. At the top of that DBQ, it states who can complete that DBQ. Also, you can find that information in the M21 manual reference, okay? 2, the DBQ is sufficient for rating purposes. So look at that bullet comment. Review DBQs to ensure the DBQ is sufficient for rating purposes. So if you submitted a sufficient DBQ in Nexus, why is that VA employee scheduling you a CMP exam? Because the reference is telling them, okay, basically if you ensure that it's sufficient for rating purposes, rate with it. But they're developing to deny by sending you to their third-party CMP examiners. And then it goes on to state, no, DBQs completed by a licensed healthcare provider to include a nurse practitioner or physician assistant are acceptable for VA examinations. Now, I've seen where some VA employee raters stating that nurse practitioners can't complete a DBQ. Now, mental, be very careful. Make sure if it's initial or review, who can't complete it, where you find that in the M21 manual reference, okay? So again, we, the veterans, have to get educated on what we're doing with our claim so we make sure we're doing it correctly per the VA guidelines, okay? Moving right along. Slide number 3. And here's slide number 3. This is assessing sufficiency of DBQs completed by non-VA providers. Now, just as a side note, I submitted a DBQ, this is years ago, and the VA schedules me for I think it was QTC. And QTC calls me and says, hey, the VA has reached out to us and they want you to come in for a CMP exam. And I said, no. Well, and I told the representative for QTC that, hey, I had my private doctor to complete it. And she says, well, private physicians cannot complete DBQs. Well, guess what? Look at this M21 reference here. They can. So she just flat out lied. But I got to thinking, how many other vets did she told that to, or that individual told that to, and that veteran didn't know any better and believed it, all right? So if the evidentiary record contains a privately completed DBQ, generally claims processors must, and they're talking about raters and droves, consider the authenticity of the information reported. Make sure it's completed by the right mental or medical professional and that it's correct and that it's completed by a per VA guidelines. Bearing in mind that it should generally be accepted at face value unless there is a reason to doubt or question it. Now, a lot of raters, they'll put in there, oh, there's inconsistencies in the DBQ. But guess what? They never tell you what those inconsistencies are because they are not inconsistencies if you had it completed the correct way and it's sufficient for rating purposes. Number 2, evaluate it under evidentiary principles discussed, and they give you another M21 manual reference, and determine if a VA examination is still warranted in accordance with, and they give you more references. Now, determine if a VA examination is still warranted. That rater has to look at that DBQ, review it to ensure that it's sufficient, okay? But you, the veteran, you've already done that for them, right? You've made sure you reached out to somebody and said, hey, I had this DBQ and Nexus statement. Review and let me know if it's sufficient, okay? Then it goes on to state, use the table below to determine what action must be taken after receiving a DBQ that has been completed by a private non-VA provider and deemed insufficient for rating purposes for the reasons described in this table. Now, there's 3 different, I think it was three or four different reasons I only copied one, all right? So again, you got to go out, continue to do your research. So it says, if the DBQ is missing information or contains blank or contradictory values in fields that are relevant to the rating activity. Rating activity, those are the raters, all right? Fields that are relevant, what they're talking about, if you look at the diagnostic code criteria for that particular condition that you're claiming, and look at the questions in the DBQ and match them up. That's what they mean. That's what they mean by relevant, okay? Because those are the questions, if they grant, that need to be answered to give you the 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50%, or whatever, all right? Then it says, then attempt to contact the certifying provider by telephone to resolve insufficiencies. Have you ever heard of that? Probably not, because you're not going to see raters do that often. Maybe 2% of them may do it, all right? Then it says document any successful effort at telephone contact. Use VA form 27-0820 report of general information. So whenever a VA employee talks to a vet, they have to fill out that form. When you call that 800 number, they're filling out that form. Once you get a copy of your VA claims folder on CD, if you ever called in, you should see that form as a PDF file on that CD. All right, so one thing that I want veterans to understand. One, you have to be educated and know what makes a DBQ and or Nexus sufficient for rating purposes. If you do not, reach out to someone that does know and make sure what you're submitting is sufficient. Now, once you submit it, 9.9% or 99.9% of the time, that VA employee is going to schedule an exam. That's what myself and my team been seeing over the past few months. And at that point in time, you're at that crossroad. You're going to have to make a decision. Do you go to the CMP exam or do you not go? A lot of people ask me, should I go? That is a decision that you have to make because you have to live with it at the end of the day. But if you know that DBQ is sufficient, hey, I'm not showing up for an exam. Rate with the evidence of record. Your references and regulations tell you that. Why are you trying to develop to deny? And that could be the argument if you decide not to go and they deny the claim, that could be your argument on a high-level review. But again, make sure you get educated. I cannot stress that enough. So with that being said, make sure you like, subscribe, hit that notification button, and don't forget to share this video with your fellow veterans. Thank you.